The Senate chamber wasn't just a room anymore, it was a stage, and the drama was about to erupt. Senator John Kennedy, not the president but just as unflinching, arose from his seat with the slow, deliberate movement of a man sharpening a knife in plain view. The room held its breath. The Louisiana lawmaker adjusted his tie like a gunslinger checking his holster. Then he stepped forward, every inch of his lean frame radiating intent. His voice? Thick molasses soaked in bourbon and sarcasm. His target? Representative Jasmine Crockett. His mission? Detonation. Before we get into it, he began, dry as dust but twice as cutting. Go ahead, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. You're not gonna want to miss what comes next. Audience laughter, scattered applause. But the mirth was fleeting. As Kennedy reached the podium, the air chilled. He wasn't here to dance. He was here to burn. Crockett, fierce, fiery, ever camera-ready, had just torn into Trump on national television. Again. Called him a billionaire con man, mocked the effort to cut government waste, and labeled fiscal reform a Republican sideshow. The usual heat. The usual headlines. But Kennedy? He came with ice. And ice cuts sharper. Wasteful spending, he said, each syllable crackling like dry twigs underfoot. Ain't just alive, it's doing backflips on your dime. And the American people? They're sick to death of footing the bill for your circus. Gasps. Murmurs. The camera pans. Brows furrow. Phones come out. Jasmine Crockett, a former civil rights attorney turned rising Democratic star, was known for trading barbs with late-night hosts and tossing verbal grenades in prime time. She'd thundered about Trump's jet, grilled him over crypto shadows, and once, to thunderous applause, dared him to an IQ test. But Kennedy? He didn't watch her shows. He watched her votes. $20 million, he said, voice dipping into disbelief, for Sesame Street in Iraq? He paused. Let it simmer. You're preaching justice, but you're funding puppets in the desert? Uncomfortable shifting. One or two chuckles. One long exhale from a back row seat. Crockett wasn't even in the chamber, but Kennedy didn't care. His words were aimed straight at her seat like a heat-seeking missile. You can keep performing, he said, but the American people aren't tuning in for reruns. They want truth, not tap dancing. His drawl thickened. The sarcasm dripped. She might think she's breaking the internet with her Kimmel cameos, but back home in Louisiana? In Texas? Folks are wondering if she's selling snake oil with a TikTok filter. Laughter. Then, applause. Louder now? He adjusted his glasses, cocked his head like a hawk eyeing a twitch in the grass, and dropped one final line, smooth, scathing, surgical. She says it's about justice, he said, deadpan. But what kind of justice takes from Texans to fund programs they've never even heard of? The room was stone silent. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Just the lingering sting of a rhetorical slap that echoed in marble. Outside? Twitter was already melting. Inside? Kennedy stood alone at the center of the storm, not shouting, not flinching, just smiling that slow, sly Southern smile that said, game on. The chamber hadn't cooled, and Senator John Kennedy had no intention of letting it. He leaned into the podium like it was a pulpit, his voice calm, but laced with the edge of a blade freshly drawn. He turned his gaze toward the cameras, not for show, but for precision. Representative Crockett, he began slowly, likes her theatrics. At a House hearing, she cooked up something she proudly called the Trump or trans game, where, apparently, everything wrong with the country, from hospital bills to gas prices, is somehow tied to the transgender community. He gave the audience a thin smile. It didn't reach his eyes. Well, he drawled, if we're playing games, I've got one too. It's called Waste or Worth. Let's give it a spin. He let the silence settle. Then flicked a paper on the lectern almost casually. $10 million American tax dollars funneled to a group tied to Al-Qaeda in Yemen. A few audible gasps. One senator leaned forward, visibly stunned. That's not oversight. That's insanity, Kennedy said flatly. You don't need a fancy degree to call that what it is, pure, unfiltered waste. Scattered applause. A low murmur of agreement spread through the room. But Kennedy was only warming up. He began rattling off examples like a prosecutor reading charges, funding diversity programs in Serbia, pouring millions into education efforts in places most Americans couldn't point to on a map, Macedonia, Georgia, even Kosovo. According to Miss Crockett, he said, voice oozing sarcasm, these are what make America strong. Sending our dollars abroad while working families back home ration groceries. A couple senators nodded grimly. Someone let out a tired sigh. Then came the pivot, personal, pointed. You might remember, Kennedy continued, the little incident at Atlanta's airport, where Miss Crockett allegedly elbowed her way past two disabled passengers to board a plane early. He lifted a hand quickly. as if warding off objections. Now I wasn't there. I don't know if it's true, but if she was in that big a hurry, maybe she could have sprinted to the budget office and stopped a few billion from vanishing. Laughter. One senator chuckled into his hand. The smile vanished from Kennedy's face. His tone grew colder. He leaned in again, this time not for theatrics, but truth. But what really boils my blood, he said, voice tightening, is when she calls this madness, this debt-drenched spending spree, an investment in our future. He shook his head like a man who'd heard too much nonsense for one lifetime. $36 trillion in national debt. That's not investing. That's theft from every working man and woman in Shreveport, Dallas, Amarillo, Baton Rouge. They're not seeing progress. They're watching their future slip into red ink. Tension built like a rising tide. The room stiffened again. Kennedy turned toward the chamber, raising his voice so it rang through the marble. She backed the so-called rescue plan, the Inflation Reduction Act. Great names, sure, but they didn't rescue anyone, and they didn't reduce a damn thing. Applause. One senator even clapped a bit too loudly. Then Kennedy dropped his final blow, sharp, final, unmistakably personal. If Miss Crockett's so eager to launch another Trump investigation, he said, voice now cool and ironclad, she might want to start closer to home. He paused. Let the words settle. Because defending this kind of reckless spending, that's the real scandal. The American people aren't tuning in for TV drama. They want answers. They want accountability. And they're tired of paying the tab. He stepped back from the podium, his expression unreadable, his silence thunderous. The Senate chamber wasn't just quiet. It was stunned. Outside, America was already listening. The Senate chamber had gone still, eerily still. You could almost hear the dust settle in the corners. The marble walls, dimly lit by the overhead glow, seemed to lean in as Senator John Kennedy, a Southern storyteller with a prosecutorial edge, stood tall in the eye of the storm. His voice, gravel soaked in molasses. His mood, calm, but with fire flickering underneath. Let me tell y'all a little bedtime story, he began, slowly flipping through a thick binder like it was a collection of horror tales. A story about what the federal government thinks your money's worth. He held the binder up for effect, then slapped it shut, thwack. And what Representative Crockett, bless her heart, calls justice. Audience stirred. Murmurs, shifting seats, a few pens frozen mid-note. He didn't wait. The first blow landed hard. $164 million, Kennedy declared, his voice suddenly taut. Poured into Gaza through USAID. A chunk of that, let's not kid ourselves, ends up in the pockets of organizations with ties to Hamas. A collective intake of breath. Someone muttered, "You're kidding." Kennedy paused. Not for effect, for impact. Now just imagine, he said, eyes scanning the chamber like a hawk. A family in Amarillo, scraping together enough to cover groceries, only to learn their tax dollars are funding groups that openly call to wipe out the Jewish scourge. He let the disgust hang there, then delivered the blow. And Miss Crockett thinks that's justice? He scoffed. No, ma'am. That's an insult, and not just to Jewish Americans, but to every single taxpayer who believed their government had a conscience. Silence. Tight-lipped faces. A few sidelong glances across the aisle. Then a shift in tone. That sly Southern smile crept across his face as he turned to the next page. Here's another gem, he said, holding up a printed chart like it was a circus flyer. $2 million. Not for schools. Not for roads. No, sir. For gender reassignment surgeries in Guatemala. Gasps. A low ripple of disbelief rolled across the chamber. He raised a hand, feigning confusion. Now look, Guatemala's a beautiful place. Wonderful people. But can someone please explain why families in Baton Rouge or Midland are footing the bill for surgeries in another country? He let the rhetorical question simmer, then turned, half serious, half sarcastic. Miss Crockett, you got an answer? Or are you busy filming your next soundbite for late-night TV? Laughter. Audible claps from the gallery. Someone whispered, "He's on fire." But Kennedy was far from finished. He flipped another page with the flair of a magician unveiling his finale. $20 million, he announced, to make a brand new version of Sesame Street in Iraq. He paused, then let out a dry, almost incredulous laugh. I mean, what's Big Bird doing over there? Giving lessons on roadside bombs? Crowd erupted in laughter. Even a few Democrats cracked unwilling smiles. He turned his attention slowly toward the Democratic seats, the space where Crockett might have been sitting. Tell me, Miss Crockett, do the good people of Dallas want their tax dollars making puppet shows in Baghdad? Or would they rather fix a few dozen schools? Maybe house some of the veterans sleeping under bridges? The laughter died down. The room sobered. And then one last turn of the blade. One more page. Kennedy's eyes narrowed. $1.5 million, he said, voice tightening again, spent to train journalists in Sri Lanka to stop using binary gender language. He blinked once. Slowly. Now, I'm not sure what that even means, he added dryly, but I'd wager if you asked a mechanic in Shreveport, he'd say, how about you use that money to patch up a pothole on I-49? Applause broke out again. Louder this time. The tension had shifted, the room was clearly listening now. Kennedy stepped back from the podium, but his face didn't break into triumph. No smirk. Just that same steel resolve. He wasn't cracking jokes anymore. This isn't just about numbers, he said, voice low but resonant. It's about priorities. And it's about the truth, no matter how many shows you go on to dodge it. And with that, he let the silence speak. Outside the chamber, the headlines had already begun to write themselves. The chamber was still. Tense. And Kennedy wasn't done. Not even close. He leaned into the mic again, eyes fierce, voice echoing like a warning bell down a dirt road before a storm. Let me make sure you heard this right, he said slowly, every word deliberate. $10 million sent straight to a group in Yemen linked to Al-Qaeda. He paused, not because he needed to, but because the silence was doing half the work. Shocked murmurs. Someone cursed under their breath. And that, he continued, voice rising with controlled outrage, is what Representative Crockett's trying to call justice? His voice dropped again, low and cold. We're handing over taxpayer dollars to the very same people our troops are risking their lives to fight. That's not policy. That's betrayal. He stared across the aisle. Imagined Crockett there, arms crossed, eyebrow raised, defiant. He didn't flinch. This isn't just waste, folks. This is a slap in the face to every American who plays by the rules and pays their taxes hoping their government isn't throwing it all into the wind. Then came the list. One by one. Like hammer strikes. $1.5 million, he said, for LGBTQ advocacy in Jamaica. $3.9 million, DI training in Macedonia. $8.3 million for equity education in Thailand. He stared at the ledger like it personally offended him. You ask a single mom in Dallas, working 2 shifts just to keep the lights on, if this is what she wants her paycheck funding. He slapped the papers down. I'll save you the trouble, she doesn't. Applause rippled across the gallery. Kennedy didn't smile. And then the grenade. There's $4.7 trillion missing from federal accounts. He let the number sit there. No embellishment needed. Not million. Trillion. Gone. Unaccounted for. Lost in the abyss. The air practically froze. Eyes widened. Phones started recording again. That's not pocket change. That's bigger than the GDP of entire continents. And Miss Crockett wants to investigate Trump's airplane receipts. His voice dropped, but it grew darker, heavier. You want corruption? Don't look at TV clips. Look at the books. This system isn't just broken, it's rotting from within. And you're defending it. He didn't give the room time to breathe. $60 million, he barked, to send condoms to Ghana. He raised his hand as if preempting criticism. Now look, I'm all for helping. Content omitted for length. Ois. Maybe she was in a hurry. But I'd suggest next time, instead of racing to board a plane, she raced to find where the $4.7 trillion in missing funds went. Laughter sharper this time. A few audible claps. He lifted a hand as if to settle the crowd. Because shining on TV doesn't hide the truth. You can wear all the glamour, get the lighting just right, but it doesn't change who's paying the bill. The American people are footing the tab for her fame. His voice grew more serious, not angry, but firm. She gets on camera, talks about social justice like she trademarked the phrase. But tell me, is justice spending $8 million to rebuild the media in Cuba? He stepped away from the mic, pacing slowly. No, folks. Justice is a paved road in Amarillo. Justice is textbooks in a Shreveport school. Justice is keeping the lights on in Jessica's neighborhood in New Orleans. Applause began, not thunderous, but real. Grounded. Kennedy turned back to the chamber, gaze sweeping like a searchlight. Now, I may not do late-night TV. I may not drop sound bites like confetti. But when I visit folks back home, I shake hands, look them in the eye, and I listen. Not as a senator, but as a neighbor. He paused, letting the contrast hang thick in the air. Miss Crockett wants to be a star. I want to serve. She plays politics for applause. I fight for the people who get ignored the second the cameras turn off. And finally, with the calm, unshakable cadence of a man who knew he'd said exactly what needed saying, he gave one last glance toward her empty seat. So Miss Crockett, keep the lights on in the studio. But don't expect the people of Texas or Louisiana to cheer for a government that gives them nothing but reruns of waste, debt, and broken promises. Kennedy stepped back. No mic drop. No swagger. Just silence, deep, resonant silence. And the echo of a nation's frustration finally spoken out loud. The chamber was electric. Tense. Still crackling with Kennedy's last challenge like dry air before a storm. And he didn't let the silence settle for long. He stepped forward again, not as a politician, but as a man planting his boots in the dust and drawing a line. When I talk to folks in Shreveport, he said, his voice calm but thunderous, I don't need makeup, a mic, or a green room. I don't need writers feeding me lines. He looked out across the room, sharp, direct, unwavering. I tell the truth. Their money's being wasted. Tossed like confetti at causes they never voted for. Miss Crockett. He paused, letting the name land. Try stepping out of the studio lights and walking into a grocery store in Dallas. Ask a single mom juggling 2 jobs what she thinks of $8 million for media training in Cuba. A few quiet nods from senators. A slow shifting in the seats. Then Kennedy's voice rose, not in anger, but in challenge. Miss Crockett, if you really want to fight for the people. His gaze narrowed, his hand gesturing wide like a referee starting the match. Then drop the mic. And come face me. Right here. On this Senate floor. Gasps. Applause from the gallery. Even a few stunned looks from across the aisle. The moment lingered, the tension thick. And then he shifted, his sarcasm melting into something more serious, more solemn. A different kind of fire. His hand curled into a fist. This isn't about politics anymore. This is about principle. It's about the trust the American people gave us and what we've done with it. He stared at the Democratic seats as if speaking directly to Crockett herself. If you believe in the justice you talk about on TV, Miss Crockett, then stop performing. Stop posturing. And stand with us. Audit every single dollar. The chamber was dead quiet now. The kind of silence that only falls when truth is too heavy to dodge. Kennedy's voice deepened, almost mournful. The people back home, the welders in Shreveport, the grandmothers in Baton Rouge, the veterans in New Orleans, they don't want speeches. They want results. They want their hard-earned money to build schools, not stage shows. To pave roads, not rewrite scripts in Sri Lanka. Then came the bold offer, not a dare, but a declaration. I'll debate her. Publicly. Anywhere. Let's sit down in front of the American people and have her explain why $1.5 million went to teaching journalists how to use non-binary language in Sri Lanka. He stared straight into the cameras now, as if Crockett was already watching. Does she dare? The question echoed, daring someone to break the silence. And still, Kennedy wasn't finished. He turned again to broader corruption, deeper rot. We need more than speeches, he said. We need action. And you know who's been leading the charge? He smiled faintly. Elon Musk. A few startled chuckles. A ripple of interest. Say what you want, but he's pulling back the curtain. And we need the kind of boldness across the board. The Department of Education? Let him audit it. The IRS? Turn it inside out. Fort Knox? Let's make sure the gold's still there and not just a story we tell school kids. Laughter. Then applause. He let the moment breathe, then called the chamber back to unity. This isn't Republican. This isn't Democrat. This is American. This is about the people who send us here expecting something better than a magic trick that disappears $4.7 trillion and blames the lights. His voice now was a clarion call, clear, brimming with urgency. We can't let a $36 trillion debt become our kids' inheritance. We can't let corruption grow so thick that we can't even see where their money's going. He turned to his colleagues. Support President Trump in scrubbing this system clean. Let's use this moment to demand something we haven't had in years, honest answers. Then he spoke to the heart of America, directly to the people as if they were in the room. If you're watching this in a diner, in your truck, on your couch after work, we're fighting for you. He pointed gently to the camera. You built this country. You pay the bills. And you deserve to know where your money's going. Then came the final line, sharp, bold, unforgettable. Tell Representative Crockett, you don't want theater. You want truth. Kennedy stepped back. No dramatic flourish. Just a steady, grounded man standing in the eye of the storm and daring it to come closer. As Kennedy's final words settled over the Senate chamber, a ripple ran through the room. Some senators clapped cautiously, deliberately. Others sat frozen, eyes distant, as if Kennedy's voice was still echoing in their ears. There was no yelling, no chaos. Just the heavy silence that follows when a truth uncomfortable and unrelenting has been laid bare. Kennedy hadn't just made a speech. He'd sparked something. With fire in his voice and facts in his hand, he turned a policy debate into a moral reckoning, a collision between two visions of America. On one side, a demand for accountability for every cent spent to be justified to the people who earned it. On the other, a defense of ambitious social spending, of global outreach, of progressive ideals that stretch beyond the borders of the nation. But the real clash? It wasn't just between Senator Kennedy and Representative Jasmine Crockett. It was between Washington and Main Street. Between the Beltway's bureaucracy and the quiet desperation of Americans like Kimberly, Mark, Ashley, Christopher, and Jessica. Kennedy called out $164 million sent to groups tied to Hamas, $20 million for Sesame Street in Iraq, and $4.7 trillion vanished into federal oblivion. He didn't speak in theory. He gave those numbers names. He gave waste a human cost. He made the issue personal because it already was. Kimberly, who skips meals to pay bills. Mark, who fought for the flag and now funds puppets overseas. Christopher, who built a dream only to see it crushed by taxes and tech subsidies. Jessica, who wore the uniform but now lives in the dark. Ashley, who taught generations and now must ration pills to survive. And across from that stood Crockett, fierce, unfiltered, unapologetically progressive. To her, government is a tool for righting centuries of wrong. Social justice is more than a slogan, it's policy. Foreign aid isn't wasteful, it's global leadership. But Kennedy's charge was clear: fine words don't fix potholes. The people want change they can feel in their wallets, not promises wrapped in hashtags. This wasn't about villainy or virtue. It was about vision. Kennedy said it plainly. If you believe in justice, then audit it. If you believe in the people, then prove it. The message? Crystal clear. Americans must speak up. Loudly. Unapologetically. Relentlessly. It starts in school gyms and city halls. In Facebook posts. In letters. In votes. Hold your representatives accountable not for their slogans, but for their spending. Don't let $1.5 million for non-binary language in Sri Lanka distract from your school's broken heating system. Don't let $60 million in condoms overseas silence the call for more cops on your street. Don't let $4.7 trillion evaporate without demanding, where did it go?